How it impacted our family directly, there was a couple different things, but I'd like to probably start with my kids first, because that was the biggest impact to my wife and I felt. So as things started to progress, the biggest challenge that we faced dealing with, we were fortunate our kids were elementary, early middle school, so grade 7 and grade 9 at the time. So they were a little bit more advanced than younger kids. But the biggest challenge as they started to roll out the first was the mask mandating. So a lot of back and forth with mask on, mask off, offline, online, in the schools, out of the schools, no contact. And as kids are going through these development years, it's very hard already socially for them. Education-wise is one thing, but just learning who they are and how they are intermingling with their peers. This created a lot of divisiveness that we found, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion, and ultimately depression is what we found. So it was something that my older daughter really had to go through, and we worked a lot with her. She's a very intelligent girl, so a very avid reader. So one of the things that I helped to do was to get her to start thinking a little bit, because one of the personal issues I had was some of the messaging that was coming from some of the teachers. Again, it could have been just a personal viewpoint, but when they're looking at a class of grade 9 students saying, this is what's happening is on you, and if you don't do a certain thing, your grandparents are going to face the price. And it makes them think a little bit like, they're already uncertain of who they are, maybe are listening to an influential speaker, and they come home with that and they feel bad about themselves. So that really started to disturb me. And what I've found is that maybe not all, but some of the teachers were not really asking the kids to think, it was just do. So I took the initiative and we basically got my daughter to start reading books. I decided I'd pay her $20 per book. I get to choose though. So we started with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, and then Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and then because she's such an intellect, we got all the way down to Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And this was really just about critical thinking and to give her some comfort that hard times, this is sometimes what happens, right? So we got to a point pretty quickly though that we were not happy with the way the schools were operating with this uncertainty and this one size fits all for everybody. So we ended up pulling them both out of school. We went to an online schooling system in Alberta here, which we found they thrived. It was teachers that were just communicating the curriculum without any add-on messaging. So for us, it was a big question to why such an impact, especially with these kids in school. They're already having a hard enough time. So one of the things we'd want to know is where was some of the data that would support that the mandating of masks or the separation of kids was actually more important or had a bigger effect, but nobody factored in the social issues or ramifications. That was concerning as a parent because depression is already high. We've seen suicide rates, even in the city I live in now, happen, and they increased because the kids are already dealing with enough. And then they added all this layer, but it almost seemed like that wasn't even part of the question. I was in the oil field at the time, and I was also running a construction company. So I had a bit of a paradigm because I was in rural Alberta working in the oil patch, but also working in the cities doing some construction work. So specifically what was happening with the bigger oil companies, that there was discussions of, as the vaccine started to get rolled out, there was dialogue within some of the companies that this was going to become something that was a prerequisite of employment. What really affected me personally was when those decisions started to get rolled out by some of the bigger major companies. And, what point was there enough data to support that this was something that needed to be done to a workforce that literally is in the middle of nowhere? We had operations side that there was one person by themselves in a pickup truck all day. That's their job, to go look at wells and look at other opportunities. But this was so important that they had to make a decision based on employment. And I do know people that had to, and it has affected them because regardless of someone's decision, if they wanted to or not take a vaccine, their livelihood was on the line. And if they had kids, Well, what choice does a dad have to make, or a mother for that instance, like, or that fact? And that's something that was really impacting a lot of people. Is this was something that was communicated. This was life or limb, like you had to do it, but it wasn't necessarily, the stats weren't showing. And then again, these were people that are working independently by themselves. So a question that I'd have on behalf of the National Citizens Inquiry to the government, and I would put the government at large, municipal, provincial, and federal. And I would ask the question regarding the vaccine passports that were implemented. At what point was there the data to support that this initiative needed to be put upon all citizens? And the reason that it impacted us personally is I did not get affected by an employer asking it of me, but I know people that did. But secondly, my daughter is a minor still, working at a restaurant, was forced to be the gatekeeper of policy that was implemented by government. She had adults coming into a restaurant that she had to then ask for personal medical information. We had to have many discussions about this and why, she was being put in that position as a young girl developing her career and learning how to work with others, but putting people in a very uncomfortable position because not everybody that came into these restaurants were that accepting of it. And it was something that was quite distressing. And it was a lot of dialogue that we had to have. And I don't know where the governments looked at that factor of putting people even at that age in a position where they had to be this gatekeeper. And I don't think it was fair to people, let alone just children, but even other adults and others in the community, because all I personally saw was divisiveness from it and a lot of divide within the communities. And this is not healthy in my opinion. So my question really comes down to, was it justified? And was anybody thinking about what this would do long term to their communities, children, and other people? Me personally, it's one word: unity. As soon as we create divide, this is unhealthy. In families, we've seen divide. Personally, this all created a great deal of divide within our own family through ideology and other ideas that came through. If we can't accept each other for who we are and the choices we make, then we're fractured, and I don't believe that's healthy for anybody. Families, community, cities, provinces, federal, the world. So as everybody talks about all this unity, well, this is the first step, is we have to get to the point where we accept people's choices. And I don't believe that there was many times where we accepted everybody's choice for what they were or factored in why they made that decision.